Omar Khayyam. True devotion is for itself, not to desire heaven, nor to fear hell. Rabia el-Adawiyah. The quatrains of Omar, son of Abraham the tent-maker, have been translated into almost every language in the world. Nothing in his reputed life as schoolfellow of the great assassin, friend of Nizam the great vizier, courtier and epicure, is as unlikely as the adventures which have befallen him in translation. It has become a commonplace that the Rubaiyat, translated by Fitzgerald, more faithfully represents the Irish poet than the Persian. Yet this is itself a superficial assessment, because Omar represents not himself, but a school of Sufi philosophy. It is necessary not only to know what Omar really said, but what he meant by it. There is a further interest in the fact that in amalgamating ideas from several Sufi poets and putting them out in the name of Omar, Fitzgerald unconsciously maintained a Sufic impact in English literature. Let us start with Fitzgerald's translation. In quatrain 55, he makes Omar speak specifically against the Sufis. The vine had struck a fibre, which about, if clings my being, let the Sufi flout. Of my base metal may be filed a key, that shall unlock the door he howls without. This seems to mean, if it means anything at all, that Omar is opposed to the Sufi, and that what the Sufi seeks may actually be found by Omar's method, not his own. To any ordinary inquirer, this poem would immediately dispose of the likelihood that Omar was a Sufi. The Sufis believe that within mankind there is an element, activated by love, which provides the means of attaining to true reality, called mystical meaning. If we turn to the original poem from which quatrain 55 was translated, looking for flouting Sufis or not, this is the meaning which we find in Persian. When the original cause determined my being, I was given the first lesson of love. It was then that the fragment of my heart was made the key to the treasury of pearls of mystical meaning. There is no Sufi, door, howl, flout, vine, or fibre, but the words used are Sufi technical terms. While it has been generally accepted that Khayyam was a poet without much honour in his own country until reintroduced by the esteem which Fitzgerald's translation caused in the West, this again is not strictly accurate. Khayyam, it is true, was not as universally prized as Sa'di, Hafiz, Rumi, and other Sufi poets. The function of the collection of poems which passes under his name was slightly different. It is doubtful whether any Sufis were asked as to what they thought of Khayyam, and it must be admitted that even if they were asked, few of them would care to discuss the matter with an outsider. Immense and painstaking labour has been devoted to the task of assessing which quatrains from the many collections of Omarian verse are original or genuine. From the Sufi point of view, since Omar was not the teacher of a school of mystics, but a single teacher and the exemplar of a school, the question is void of importance. Much interest has been shown by literary researchers in the possible influence upon Omar of the blind poet Abu al-Ali al-Mari. In the Luzum, written a generation before Khayyam, Mari published very similar poetry which is said to be reminiscent of Khayyam. Mari wrote like Khayyam, and Khayyam like Mari, a Sufi would say, because they were both writing from the point of view of the same school. Khayyam probably copied Mari just as much as two swimmers copy each other if they swim together, having learnt, separately or together, from the same source. This is the impasse which develops when one party, the literary, is looking at one facet of a work, and another party, the mystic, at the intention or influence within a certain context. Khayyam is the Sufi voice, and the Sufi voice to the Sufi is timeless. In poetry, it will not submit readily to time-centered theories. That Khayyam has been rediscovered in Persian through the fame of translations is correct. If we amend this to read, Khayyam was not well known to non-Sufis until comparatively recently in Persia. However, through the efforts of Western scholars, his work has become known very widely to non-Sufis there. Professor Cowell, who introduced Omar to Fitzgerald and taught him Persian, found the Sufi content in Khayyam through talks with Indian scholars of Persian. Some later scholars have concluded that these people misled the professor. Some Western experts will have no Sufic content in Khayyam. The Reverend Dr. T.H. Weir, a lecturer in Arabic, Khayyam wrote in Persian, wrote a book about Omar in which he is quite clear about this. The truth is, he says in his Omar Khayyam the Poet, that one cannot read half a dozen lines of Omar without seeing that there is no mysticism here, any more than in Burns. He does not tell us what kind of mysticism he is referring to, or how he would identify it. Fitzgerald himself was confused about Omar. Sometimes he thought that he was a Sufi, sometimes not. But he had himself absorbed a great deal of Sufi thought. Heron Allen, who made a most careful analysis, shows that material which people had thought was concocted by Fitzgerald often came from other Persian poets. These authors were the ones which have, since Chaucer, most influenced English writers, the Sufis Attar, Hafiz, Sa'di, and Jami. Perhaps intentionally, but probably accidentally, Fitzgerald had become soaked in Sufic teachings from what are Persian basic texts. These matured in his mind until they emerged, mixed with Omar, to form the Rubaiyat in English. Had Fitzgerald known about the special teaching technique used by Khayyam, following up a line of thought in order to imply its shallowness, he might have provided something even more effective in its impact. The translator also missed the stress placed by Khayyam on the Sufic state of understanding which comes after inebriation, contained in such passages as this. I cannot live without wine. Without the cup's draught I cannot carry my body. I am the slave of that breath in which the Saki says, take one more cup, and I cannot do so. This is a clear reference to the condition attained under Sufi teachers when what was an ecstatic experience develops into a real perception of the hidden dimension beyond the metaphorical drunkenness. Fitzgerald's version of Khayyam has never been improved upon in English because, in order for Sufi ideas to be transmitted to any extent in any generation, there must be a certain measure of harmony between the ideas and the formulation of the time. This is not to say that everyone could see this content in Omar. He captured Swinburne, Meredith, and millions of people seeking a way of thinking outside the conventions within which they felt themselves imprisoned. But others sensed that this was in some way a threat to convention. A celebrated Doctor of Divinity, Dr. Hastie, did not attempt to understand the depth in Khayyam. He found the Fitzgerald version of the rudest wit and shallowest reflection, lean and flashy songs. Fitzgerald himself had produced a new-patched Omar, exciting, miserable, self-deluded, unhealthy fanatics of his cult. This cult was a literary craze and delusion, infatuation and spurious idolatry. Did the reverend gentleman feel his values threatened by one who was, after all, only a tipsy toper, cowardly scamp, bankrupt, blustering, purblind braggart? Omar was perhaps as often misunderstood in the East as in the West. Perturbed because so many English-speaking Muslim students in India were enthused over Khayyam in Fitzgerald's translation, at least one orthodox Muslim divine circulated a warning. In The Explanation of Khayyam, Maulvi Khanzada, Lahore 1929, a widely circulated pamphlet, he did what he could to fit the problem into his own perspective. First, he argues, not without reason, that Fitzgerald did not know Persian really well. Secondly, he insists that Cowell did not know it well either. Both scrawled badly, like small children. People who wanted to read Khayyam should study the Persian first, not English. Even before Khayyam, they would then be able to get a proper basis of Islam before passing on to complicated matters like Sufism. Finally, Khayyam is a generic term applied to a way of teaching, which the Sufis have and which would in any case be misleading if taken on its own, out of books and without a master. Khayyam was a great cult in England. His devotees formed clubs, planted roses from Nishapur on Fitzgerald's grave, sought to emulate him in their poetry. The literary cult multiplied in spite of the fact that it was known that the oldest available manuscript was written 350 years after its author's death, almost as if all we knew about St. John of the Cross was in a document written yesterday, and we had to base our assessment of him on that and very little else. From the Sufi point of view, Khayyam's poetry has multiple functions. It may be read for its apparent content alone. It may be recited under certain conditions in order to provide special improvements in the range of consciousness. It may be decoded to obtain material of use in Sufic studies. It is a part of the Sufi heritage, and as such performs a comprehensive role whose undertaking is itself a part of Sufi specialization. It is reported of Khan Janfishan Khan, chief of the Hindu Kush Sufis and a great 19th century master, that he used the quatrains of Omar in his teaching. A disciple reports, 3 new members came to the Khan. He received them, told them to go away and study Khayyam, then to report on him. In a week they reported on his reception day. The first said that the effect of the poems had been to make him think, and to think as he had not thought before. The second said that he thought Khayyam a heretic. The third felt that there was some deep mystery in Khayyam, which he hoped he would eventually be able to understand. The first was kept on as a disciple. The second was sent to another teacher. The third was sent back to study Khayyam for another week. A disciple asked the Khan whether this was a method of assessing the potentialities of the would-be Sufis. We already knew something about them through intuitive means, said the master. But what you consider a test is partly a test and partly a fragment of their training. Further, it has the function of helping to train the watchers as well. This is Sufism. It is a composite, if you like, of study, feeling, and the interaction of people and thought. I was present one day when an enthusiastic German follower of Omar read a complicated and wordy analysis of Khayyam and his sources to a Sufi master. Beginning with the contention that Omar was discovered by von Hammer almost 40 years before Cowell and Fitzgerald, he ended by showing to his own satisfaction that almost every type of philosophical theory was embodied in the Rubaiyat. The sage listened to him in complete silence. Then he told a story, and here it is. A scholar went to a Sufi master and asked him about the 7 Greek philosophers who fled to Persia from the tyranny of Justinian, who had closed their philosophical schools. They were of our number, replied the Sufi. Delighted, the scholar went away and wrote a treatise on the Greek origins of Sufic thought. One day he met a travelling Sufi who said, "The master Hilami and the great Rumi quote Jesus as a Sufi teacher." Perhaps he means that the Greek knowledge passed to the Christians and also to the Sufis, thought the scholar. He wrote this into his treatise. The original master, on a pilgrimage, passed through the scholar's hometown one day. Meeting him, he said, "And the heretics and thousands who do not know it are of our number." My friend, the Sufi, looked closely at the German scholastic. Wine contains water, sugar, fruit, colour. Mix these together, and you will not produce wine. We are sitting in a room. Suppose a man said, "The Chinese have rooms, therefore all rooms are copied from them. There is a carpet here. This means Mongol influence. A servant just entered. This surely is a Roman habit. Or is it a pharaonic one? Now, through the window I see a bird. Research has shown that birds were almost certainly seen through windows by ancient Egyptians. What a wonderful amalgam of inherited customs this place is." What would you think of such a man? There are several forms of invisible saints, or friends, corresponding with the general human need for a certain representation of psychic or psychological activity in the whole community, according to Sufi teaching. Ujwiri, in Revelation of the Veiled, Nicholson's version, page 213, says, "Among them there are 4,000 who are concealed, and do not know one another, and are not aware of the excellence of their state, but in all circumstances are hidden from themselves and from mankind." Traditions have come down to this effect, and the sayings of the saints proclaim the truth thereof, and I myself, God be praised, have had ocular experience of this matter. E. H. Winfield, Mathnavi, London 1887, page 27 and following, related this concept more closely with current ideas as to who or what such people might be. A very remarkable doctrine is that of unrecognized saints. There are always on earth 4,000 persons who are, so to speak, saints without knowing it. These are they who are born with a natural goodness, which lifts them without effort to a point that most labour to reach in vain, loyal, gentle, unselfish souls, endowed with a natural intuition of good and a natural inclination to pursue it, the stay and comfort of those who enjoy the blessing of their society, and, when they have passed away, perhaps canonized in the hearts of one or two who loved them. Spontaneous goodness of this sort is not to be submitted to rules or forms. The inward inclination, not the outward ordinances, is the source of their goodness. Against such there is no law. They have a standard of thought and character of their own, quite independent of the praise or blame of men of externals. Sufi teaching accords such people a place in the total evolutionary pattern of mankind. Omar's so-called theory of transmigration was assessed by Professor Brown, one of the greatest British authorities on Persian literature and author of the standard Literary History of Persia, who quotes a traditional tale about the poet supposed to prove that he believed in reincarnation. The poet was, one day, about to pass an old college in Nishapur, accompanied by a group of his students. A string of donkeys, carrying bricks for the repair of the building, entered. One, however, refused to pass through the gates. Omar looked at the scene, smiled, and went up to the donkey, reciting an extempore poem. O one who has gone and returned, your name has been lost from among names. Your nails are combined into hooves, your beard a tail, now on the other end. The ass now readily entered the college grounds. The disciples, puzzled, asked their teacher, "Wise one, what does this mean?" The spirit which is now within that ass was once inside the body of a teacher in this college. It was reluctant to go in as a donkey. Then, finding that it has been recognized by a fellow teacher, it had to enter the precincts. But Omar was not, as has been thought by externalists, indicating a possibility that some element of human entity might attach itself to another living form. Neither was he just taking an opportunity of tilting at the sterile scholasticism of his time. Nor was he showing that he could influence donkeys by means of verse. If he was not showing off in front of his disciples, not playing a joke, not carrying out some private activity mysterious to the unenlightened onlooker, not preaching a form of reincarnation, not essentially versifying, what was he doing? He was doing what all Sufi teachers do, applying a complex impact for the benefit of the students, allowing them to participate in the fact of accompanying a teacher through a comprehensive experience. This is a form of demonstrative communication which is known only to those who have been through the rough and tumble of a Sufi school. The moment the process is split up by the inquiring mind, in an attempt to relate it to a single, even a double rational meaning, the meaning itself drops away. The disciple learns through this method things which cannot be conveyed by any other. Reproduce them in print, and unless you add a caution, trying to indicate their special character, the situation will appear to the most earnest inquirer as obscure at best. The name which Omar chose for his own, Omar Khayyam, decodes by numerical cipher to Ghahi, squanderer of goods, a name used for a man who does not care for the ordinary things of this world, when dissipation of attention upon them prevents his developing of meaningful perception of another dimension. One of Omar's most telling poems against mechanical thinkers, academic or emotional, might still be used with every justification to reproach his later self-appointed critics and expounders. O ignorant ones, the road is neither this nor that.